Hi guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the iFi Zen DAC. Now this DAC can be found for around £130 in the UK, $130 in the US. If you live elsewhere or indeed in these territories, check out the link in the description below, the locally link. It'll take you to your localized Amazon store so you can purchase it. And yes, if the title wasn't obvious enough, I'm very impressed with this DAC, and I'm going to tell you why in this video. So in terms of what you get in the box, other than this actually quite nice looking box, you've got the DAC itself, you've got a manual which is pretty comprehensive, and then you've got a USB cable and an RCA interconnect. Now the cable itself, the USB cable, is extremely short. I would highly suggest buying another one or an extender, so a USB type A female to male extender for your PC, because this is only around 80 to 90 centimeters from one end to the other, but nevertheless it's worth bearing that in mind. And it's also worth bearing in mind that this doesn't have a DC power input adapter in the box. However, you can add it if you so wish. Now the reason you'd want that is if you want to differentiate from the USB power and you want to drive more power to your headphones, or indeed if you want to try and better the sound. In my case, I had the iPower X by iFi that they provided to use with this DAC, and I just didn't find it of any use in terms of reducing the noise floor or anything like that, because the USB power that I had from my PC was perfectly fine. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about the build quality of the DAC. Now, it is built very well. It's solid metal all the way around. It does induce a good sort of chunk to it. You could probably hit a zombie and probably kill it with it. You've got, in terms of size, around 10 centimeters in terms of length, 15 centimeters in terms of length, 10 centimeters in terms of width, in terms of its height, around 5 centimeters. In comparison to something like the Audio Engine D1, which you can see over here, it's a lot bigger and obviously a lot heftier because it's made out of full metal. But it's worth bearing that in mind that if you're going to be, I don't know, a laptop user and you want something portable, then a D1 would be a better option in terms of portability only. Now, in terms of inputs and outputs, now I find this quite interesting because iFi have decided to exclude a 3.5mm jack from the front panel. In fact, all over, there's no 3.5mm jack output. Now, the reason I mention this is because the DAC is aimed at headphones and IEM, in other words, earphone users. In this case, I've got the Hi-Fi Man Sandaro, which you can see are terminated by a 3.5mm jack. I've got my Denon custom modeled headphones, which are terminated by a 3.5mm jack. And I've got the Hi-Fi Man RE2000 Silver, £1,300 earphones, which are terminated by a 3.5mm jack. So in other words, to use these, I need to use an adapter, which isn't a problem because I can plug it into the 6.3mm jack output over here, but it's worth bearing that in mind that it does not come with a 3.5mm jack output. What it does come out with is a 6.3mm unbalanced output and two 4.4mm Pentagon balanced outputs, which is great for the audiophiles who have that sort of output. But in all honesty, I've only come across a few earphones that actually have that output natively. So anyway, worth bearing that in mind. Now, moving on from that, you got a volume knob. The volume knob itself has got a good resistance to it. It's not clicky. It's worth bearing that in mind, but it's well built and it looks quite nice. It also illuminates, and the reason why it illuminates is because it tells you in terms of the audio formats that it's using, the kilohertz. So you can see right now it's on yellow, and that's because in terms of PCM, it's running at its maximum resolution you can get over the PC, and that is 32-bit 384 kilohertz. Now this does support DSD 256 and also MQA, so audiophiles will be pretty pleased to hear about that, and of course they will light up in different colors, so blue and magenta respectively. Now, as you might be able to notice, there is also no on and off switch, which is a little bit of a bugger because if you do want to power this thing off, you literally have to yank out the cable like I did there. Unlike all of its DACs that pretty much come in the same price range, there's an on and off button. So in this one, the D1 has a little button over here which illuminates and you turn it on and off. Now, this won't be an issue if people have no issue in terms of like plugging it out, but for me, I like having a DAC that I can switch on and off, and talking about audiophile products, something like a Hugo 2 DAC over here will have an on and off button, and it's a shame to see that this doesn't actually have it. Anyway, it's worth bearing that in mind as one of the flaws that I found with the DAC, and something that when I was coming to actually using it on a daily basis, I think might annoy some people. Anyway, Moving on from that, at the front you've got two other buttons. Unfortunately, they were not the on and off buttons. The first one is a true bass button. That essentially adds extra oomph in the low end. It does add more than you need, in my opinion, but it's completely subjective. If you do want more bass, you can always add it via true bass. It adds a quite substantial amount of a weight behind the mid bass and sub bass response. Then you've got power match, which is almost like a gain switch, adds extra power if you so need it. So this mainly if you're going to switch it off if you're using earphones, and switch it on if you're using headphones. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on the impedance of your headphones. Now around the back, I mentioned about the 4.5mm output. You've got a fixed and variable switch, which you can switch as well. You've got RCA, and then you've got digital input, in other words USB, and then, as I mentioned before, about the DC jack input as well. So now let's talk about the most important fact of this review, is the audio quality. Now, as I mentioned before, the title might be giving it away somewhat, but nevertheless I thought to mention it as to how good this DAC actually is. Now, these are some DACs I've got in picture. You've got a £130 DAC, the D1, you've got a £1,800 DAC, the Hugo 2, and then you've got the a Cambridge Audio DAC, which is £300. Other DACs in question will be the Creative G6, the G5 as well, its predecessor, and also the Sennheiser GSX 1000, which can be found for around £200 and £130 respectively. If you're interested about that, I've done a roundup of best DACs back in 2018, so make sure you check that down in the description below. Now, its biggest competitor, in my opinion, would be the D1. Mainly the fact that it comes at the exact same price range, has got similar sort of inputs and outputs, and it's just worth bearing in mind that D1 is quite popular. So how does it compare? Well, quite simply, the Zen DAC puts the D1 to shame in almost every department. So let's break it down. First of all, the sub bass. The sub bass extends really well. It's got a good fluid extension, and it doesn't feel cut off. Its competitors that I mentioned before have a slight cut off on the sub bass. It's not bad, but in comparison to the Zen DAC really does shine. In comparison to something that's more expensive, however, it doesn't sound as fluid and as comfortable, let's say, in comparison to something like the Cambridge Audio DAC. Still, considering this Zen DAC is around 2.5 times cheaper than this Cambridge Audio DAC, it's talking a lot about how good this Zen DAC actually sounds. Moving on to the mid bass, it's got a substantial weight to it, but however it's controlled and it's defined really, really well. In comparison to the D1, for example, which doesn't sound as strong in the bass but yet sounds controlled, or in comparison to the G6, which sounds uncontrolled but has a lot of weight towards it, the Zen DAC finds that sort of, well, Zen moment. It finds that sort of middle ground between performance in terms of how it sounds and also in terms of the actual weight behind it. Now, some people will not want that amount of bass. I would suggest EQing it, although some other people might want more bass, and that's where that true bass button comes in handy. So your mileage may vary. Personally, I found it perfectly great without the true bass option enabled. I found that I listen to a lot of R&B and dance music, so worth bearing that in mind. Moving on to the mid-range, here is again where the Zen DAC shine. It came out really on top of, let's say, the Creative G6 or the Sennheiser GSX 1000, because it sounds really good. It's forward sounding. Forward sounding in its bracket, shall I say, in terms of its price bracket, and also has a very good accuracy. The D1, I would say, is very comparable to this in terms of its mid-range response, so it's worth bearing in mind that the Zen DAC does hold its own in this department. In terms of the highs, it also does extend very well. It sounds very fluid. It doesn't have that sibilant sort of a sound that you might expect from the GSX 1000, for example, and nor does it have that sort of kind of roll-off that the Creative G6 might have. So in this respect, the Zen DAC does great again. However, in comparison to something that's more than double its price, I say Creative, but it's Cambridge Audio. The Cambridge Audio DAC over here just sounds a little bit more, I don't know, more comfortable and more at ease at producing better mid-range response, and specifically the highs as well. But the soundstage, on the other hand, is something which completely blows my mind at £130. This thing is so good that I was comparing it directly and A/B testing it versus a Hugo 2 DAC. That's how good this sounds in terms of soundstage. It's got an airy soundstage, it's got a good width, it's got good depth, it's got great imaging, and it's so phenomenal that it puts all the other DACs which compete at the same price, so like the D1, G6, GSX 1000 and so on, to shame, because they all sound pretty close sounding. And don't get me wrong, I love the D1, I love all the other DACs I mentioned before, but the Zen DAC really takes it to another level and gives you a fantastic fantastic overall instrument separation and phenomenal soundstage. So I can't stress it enough. In terms of overall sound quality, that what you get from a DAC, the iFi Zen DAC is phenomenal. I'm comparing it to a £1,800 DAC, a £300 DAC over here, and in comparison to once it comes to its price, it's completely above what its pay grade is. There is some flaws, as I mentioned before, from outputs and inputs and to the actual power on and off. But other than that, if you take away that in terms of pure sound quality, this thing is phenomenal, and definitely the one I would recommend at under £200 or £250, let alone its £130 price tag. So there we have it, guys. That's been my review. Honest, unbiased, unpaid, as always. If you like that type of content, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, favorite and share, and also let me know in the comments below what you think about this DAC. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye-bye.